You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, it's that time again, isn't it? It's already Thursday. See, I told my wife earlier, I said, sometimes a week seems like it takes a while to go by, but when it comes to doing the radio show, it seems like every other day is Thursday. I guess I stay busy enough that the time just flies, and maybe part of it is just getting older, that the days go by much, much faster. Anyway, it's Thursday evening, and I'm glad to have you back with us. This is Michael Murphy, the voice of reason, and we're going to spend a little time here talking about a few things. Once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen in. It means a lot to me that you take the time to either record this or download this or whatever it is you do that allows you to listen in. We're gonna. I've got a lot on my mind, and I almost don't know where to start. And that's not unusual. I was at a meeting on Tuesday evening. It was a local group, and it had a couple people speaking. One was from the local Chamber of Commerce in relation to business and all, and the other one was a local business owner. And part of what they were talking about was the local community's taxes and policies and what it means to businesses. Somebody had written a letter to the editor some time back in the local paper and had questioned, what's happening to the businesses in our community? How come businesses are folding up and leaving? And of course, there's a lot of answers to that. Sometimes businesses fold up and leave just because they're poorly managed. Sometimes businesses are ill-conceived. The timing's wrong, whatever. People have a great idea or a great product, but the timing's wrong. Or maybe they don't have a great idea or a great product, and it wouldn't matter when they brought it. People just aren't just gonna buy it. So there are a lot of issues, but one thing that they were talking about was local taxes. Our state and county and city taxes, and that, of course, makes kind of an even playing field because we all have that, at least all in this region. Now, one thing that was brought out, of course, is as you move from town to town, the taxes change. Your local government finds different ways of funding the services that they have, so you end up with different ways of raising that revenue. Obviously, taxes are something we've got to have. It would be a wonderful world if we just could just go about our business and not have to pay any taxes. That place doesn't exist, at least not on this earth and not in our lifetime. One thing that was brought out is how things are brought about in kind of a devious way, maybe. One of the local county commissioners had put out a paper that showed that our county within the state of Kansas actually had one of the lower, I think it was like 13 from the bottom as far as our tax rate was concerned. And this is the rate at which we pay, our sales tax and property tax and things like that. And a lot of us had always felt like ours was a little bit higher. And of course that can be that can have an effect by how the mill levy is one thing, the valuation is another. So while the mill levy might be low, they might be fudging a little bit the valuation. If they jack the valuation a little bit, it might not be enough that you go in and contest it, and yet it brings in a little bit more revenue. So there are sneaky ways of doing things like that, but one of the sneakiest ways of doing things is by adding fees. And one fee, and I should have looked this up a little bit before I got on here. I've been really busy trying to get the garden planted. We've had such cool, wet weather the last 2 days. It's been really nice, and I've spent all day in the garden trying to get the garden all planted. And so I have not spent the time in show prep that I should. I apologize for that, but now I live out in the country, so this doesn't directly affect me. But the city of Hutchinson, where is closest to us, and that's where we do our shopping primarily and all. They recently added a rainwater fee, and I think they said it comes to around $4.30 per person. I mean, not per person, but per homeowner, who has city services, and that's one of those things where you think, $4.30, okay, that's not the end of the world. But, if you have several things that are $4.30, next thing you know, that's enough to take the family out to dinner once a week or once a month. So it does impact you, even though it's a relatively small amount. What a lot of people didn't realize is that also, of course, falls on businesses, but on businesses it's done by square footage. And some businesses pay as much as $1,000 a month for their rainwater fee. In fact, they said now that Hutchinson has the Kansas State Fairgrounds in Hutchinson, and it's a rather large facility with multiple buildings and a lot of acreage, a racetrack, a big grandstand where they do concerts, etc. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they said that they have three water meters, and that is with the square footage and everything comes to something like $8,000 per meter per month for that rainwater fee. Now that seems incredible, and I don't want you to quote me on that. I would, like I said, I should go in and do a little more research to make sure I'm not feeding you a line. But it wouldn't surprise me, because this is the sort of thing that cities do. The state's not going to, contest the city doing that. The state's going to just pass that on to the fairgoers. They'll raise the gate admission just a bit. All the vendors, they'll raise that fee just a tiny bit, and by all of them then will pay for it. And so the state fair is not going to really see an impact on that. And it's a little bit easier for them to absorb. A guy that's got a, say like a heating and air conditioning business or a restaurant or something like that, they will that can you throw another $1,000 expense into their budget, and that's a part-time employee, or that's an expansion, or any number of things, and so. When we're looking at a time when taxes are so high, and there's so much waste, the comment was made that I believe the local school district had a bunch of money that if they didn't use it, they would lose it. So they went out and they bought a bunch of equipment that's been sitting in a parking lot for 5 years and have not touched any of it. And those are the sorts of things. That's one city in one county of this nation, and you can imagine that happens a lot. We get into the state level, we have the same problem. We get into the federal level, we have the same problem. The waste and abuse is unbelievable. And that's part of why a lot of us, we say, it'd be one thing if we were paying taxes and we knew that the services that we're paying for were appropriate, but we're paying for things we don't like, we're paying for things we don't want, and then we're paying for all that waste. And it just kind of drives us crazy. Okay, well that's that soapbox. So we'll move on. I want to talk just a little bit about the Manchester attack. It's been, of course, and rightfully so, in the news. Quite frankly, I am amazed we don't have more of these. And it's probably due to the fact, I think there's probably a couple factors of why. Number one, it's a little hard to find people who are willing to strap explosives on their body and go blow themselves up. Okay, I can imagine that's the case. I know that they teach these people that if they give their lives in this cause, that they go to paradise, and they also save their entire family, and their family all goes to paradise, and everything's wonderful. The bottom line is that most of us still kind of like living, and to end that purposely long before your time is a little difficult. So I think part of it is finding people who are willing to do that. Another is we've seen, like with the underwear bomber, the shoe bomber, some of these things like that. These are not the brightest bulbs in the pack of light bulbs, and so when you get somebody who's willing to do it, they may not have all their oars in the water, so to speak. So I suppose that's part of why it doesn't happen more often. But it seems to me like if this was something they were really trying to really make a point on, that they would set off multiple bombs in multiple places around not just a city, but maybe around a country. I'm amazed we haven't had it here. I mean, we've had some minor, so like the Boston bombing and things like that, the deal out in San Bernardino. But we really, I think we have a greater chance of winning the lottery or being struck by lightning than we do being killed by a terrorist in this country. It makes a lot of news. It's sensational, and it's certainly a problem that needs to be addressed. However, I think sometimes it gets attention that maybe should be handled, some of that attention should go somewhere else. Quite frequently, there's something going on in the news whenever there's a terrorist attack. It takes the focus off that person or that event and brings it to the terrorist, and then next thing you know, you've moved on, and that person that was being dragged over the coals or whatever suddenly is off the hook. I think we see a lot of those sorts of things, and I don't know. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. We all know it's a terrible thing. That it's certainly an issue and certainly a problem. It's nice to have an administration that is willing to say that Islamic terrorism is a problem. We've spent 8 years avoiding that at all costs. The other day, President Trump was in Saudi Arabia, and he spoke with a number of Muslim leaders, and he specifically addressed the issue and said, "You've got to do something about it." Well, it's about time that fingers were pointed. Fingers need to be pointed at mosques, at imams or preachers, whatever you want to call them. Things need to be brought out, and these people need to be called out on the carpet and held accountable for these things. They're continually fomenting this hate. There needs to be some changes. There's no doubt about that. This problem will probably never go away. We've been dealing with Muslim terrorists as long as there's been written history, just about. Ever since what 600 something AD when Muhammad came on the scene and started his reign of terror. Anyway, we're going to take just a short little break. Let me wet my whistle, and then we're going to jump off into something else. Yeah, thanks. I needed that. I'm glad you're staying with me. Glad to have you with us. It's great to be here. I want to step off and look at something, an article that I wrote. It was this week. actually a couple articles I wrote this week. We're gonna look at a couple of them. One was about an event that took place back in 1989. I've got to go back here and find it. Get it pulled up here. I always wanted to fly, and I was lucky enough to be able to learn to fly and achieve the ultimate goal of being a captain at a major airline. I also had some neat times leading up to that. Had my own business, my own charter business. Had a what's called a fixed base operation for those of you who are non-flyers. That's basically like a service station that for airplanes. It's a place for transient aircraft to get fuel, for local people to take flight instruction. We did charters, we did light maintenance, things like that. We also had a government contract for jet fuel, and it was primarily for helicopters. We were on a kind of a central flyway, and helicopters have limited range, and so we would get quite a few helicopters in there filling up, and that government contract helped us a lot and also helped them. But anyway, the day was July 30th, 1989. It was just a typical day, and I'm going to tell you about that. I'm going to go ahead and go through this whole story because I think it's kind of interesting. It's online in lanterns.buzz, and you can get it. It's called "Cigarettes Can Kill or Get You Killed." Now that's gonna you'll figure out what that means here in a little while. I'd been gone on a trip. I'd been gone on a charter during the day, and I got home, and as was typical in the summertime, since it got dark late, we would have supper there at the airport. We had a facility there where we had some rooms and kind of a little kitchen area, and since we needed to be out there and to take care of traffic and aircraft and all like that, at least during the daylight hours, we would have supper there, and then when it got about sunset, we would close up and go home. Now, typically, we had a radio at our house, and so if somebody called wanting fuel or needing something, we could answer them from our house, and then we were only 5 miles away, and we could drive out there. By the time they landed, we could be out there and we could take care of them. So it was kind of a good setup for us and for them. So anyway, this particular day, my wife had received a call during the day and said, "Hey, got a plane going to be in there late tonight. Are you guys open late?" And my wife says, "Well, we usually close up about sunset. What do you have in mind?" "Well, this will probably be about 11:30 at night." So my wife explained to her, the situation, how we could be back out there. And the lady says, "Well, so do you live on the airport?" And she says, "No, we don't live on the airport, but we're close, and we can, about 5 minutes away, and we can drive back out." And the lady said, "Okay, well, we'll let you know if we need anything." And that's kind of the way it left. We left it. So anyway, we stayed up kind of late to kind of see if the phone was going to ring or the radio call would come in, and it never did. And that's not all that unusual. Sometimes people, their plans change. And so anyway, we decided to go to bed about 12:30. And we hadn't been in bed very long. And the phone rang. I thought, oh, well, they didn't call on the radio. They're calling on the phone. And I get Mr. Murphy, and I said, yes. And it was the police dispatcher. And they said, they caught a plane out at the airport with a little dope on it, and they need you to come out and open the hangar so it can be secured. So, okay, well, I'm wide awake. It wasn't a big deal. So I threw my clothes on. My wife said, I'll just go with you. So I said, okay. My dad was staying with us at the time. He was there for a visit, and so we told him we were leaving and what was going on, and he stayed there with our kids, and we went on to the airport. Well, I wasn't really prepared for what I saw. I mean, when they say we caught a plane with a little dope on it, I'm thinking they've got a 4 or 6 place single engine airplane. Somebody's flying some grass in or something like that, and they caught them when they're trying to unload it or something like that. So I get out to the airport, and it's lit up like a Christmas tree. There's a Beech Queen Air, which is an older corporate type twin engine airplane, sitting there, and parked in front of it with all the landing lights still on is a Beech King Air 200. And behind it is a Cessna Citation with its lights on as well, in addition to several law enforcement police cars, Texas DPS troopers, local sheriff, etc. And it was it was quite a bunch of activity. And I get there, I said, "Hey, what do you got here?" Anyway, turns out by the time they figured it all out, the Queen Air had 882 kilograms, that's 1,940 pounds of cocaine wrapped in burlap bags. I said, a little dope. Exactly right. Estimated street value was placed at $83 million. Now, you think about that. That has just dropped into my into my facility, and it's going to be parked in my hangar overnight. We were up all night, obviously, and the story unfolded as I began to have a chance to talk, because we had the Citation was a customs airplane, and the King Air was a DEA aircraft, and of course before the night and the day was over, FBI was there and everything else. So anyway, what happened was air traffic control sees this plane come across the border without checking in and without going to clear customs, and so they notified customs, and the customs Citation takes off and goes up and intercepts the airplane. Now, the Citation is a business jet. It's not an extremely fast jet, but it's a jet, and it doesn't have any problem with its radar on board and everything like that. It finds this Queen Air, and it comes up and with its lights off. And this guy was flying with his lights off, and they came up with infrared photography, and they took pictures, and they could clearly see inside the aircraft. They could see all these bundles, and they could see the pilot sitting there smoking a cigarette while he flew. And so they pulled back, and they just shadowed him, and they also notified the DEA, who sent their King Air 200 up. Well, they get further up north into Texas. As they approach the Red River, the guy starts a descent. And using a scanner, they've figured out what frequency that he's talking to his ground crew. So they've got a place all set up out in the country on a county road. And he comes into land with they have their pickups and stuff like that, and lights and all like that alongside the road so that he can see the road. Well, he comes down to land. The King Air is right behind him. The King Air is going to land behind him. Now, the King Air has turboprop engines, and it can use reverse thrust and land and stop a lot shorter than the Queen Air can, which has normal reciprocating engines on it. So he's coming in behind him. The Queen Air gets down, just about to touch down. What the ground crew hadn't counted on or thought about is that all the sides of the roads in that country all are grown up with wild sunflowers. And these sunflowers get up 5, 6, 7 feet tall. They're just covered with these little sunflowers, and the center of them is kind of hard. Now, they're not going to hurt an airplane, but I can guarantee you when you're flying maybe about 100 miles an hour, and those the heads of those sunflowers start pounding on the wings as he's just about to touch down, it would probably be a little disconcerting. And he didn't know what it was. He thought something was falling apart, and so he gave power and took off and went around, and aborted his landing. Well, when he did that, of course, the King Air was right behind him, and the King Air also had to abort his landing, and the ground crew heard the other airplane behind him and said, "Hey, you're being followed. We're out of here," and they took off. Well, the Citation was sitting up there above, and he's relaying all this information to law enforcement. They're trying to find where they are. Of course, the Citation doesn't know the area. He doesn't know what roads these are or anything like that. So he just is giving vague directions, and DPS troopers are up running around. In fact, I know a retired trooper that I was talking to him about this fairly recently, and he says, "I remember that night." He says they had us running all over the place trying to figure out what was going on and where they might go, and they were covering other airports in case the guy flew to an airport. So anyway, Childress was the closest airport, and that was where we were, and so he flies over to Childress and lands, and of course they hem him in. The King Air landed behind him, follows him in, and as soon as he stopped, the King Air spun around, raced around in front of him and cut him off to where he couldn't go anywhere. And agents piled out of the King Air with automatic weapons and surrounded the airplane and started yelling at him to put his hands up and all. And I thought it was kind of interesting. They said, are you armed? And he says, no. And they said, you better not be or we'll kill you. And they said, are you alone? He said, yeah, I'm alone. They said, well, you better not be lying or we'll kill you. And they told him to get, to come out. And the only door in a Queen Air like that is a rear air stair door. So he had to crawl out over the top of his load and get to the back. And of course, you can't stand up in the aircraft, really. It's not tall enough unless you're very short. And so he opens the door, and the door, comes down. And the door has steps built into it. It's why they call it an air stair door. So when you let the door down, then it becomes the ladder, basically, for you to climb in and out of the aircraft. And so he steps out of from inside the aircraft and stands up, where he doesn't have to stoop over anymore, and he's got his hands up. And then he suddenly takes his right hand and reaches inside to his windbreaker. And they start screaming and yelling at him, say, get your hands up, get your hands up. And he does. And they thought that he was going for a gun. Actually, he was going for a pack of cigarettes. And thus the title of the article. I said, well, cigarettes can kill you or at least get you killed. Certainly, had they had a little bit more of an itchy trigger finger or something like that, it would not have been very difficult for them to have shot the poor guy. He might have wished that they had shot him. I imagine before the thing's all over. But anyway, the way the thing ended up was. The plane was all unloaded, of course, and eventually everything, hauled away and everything slowed down. And a little interesting side note, I actually had already did work for the DEA at the time as a contractor. And what I did was when aircraft were confiscated, I had a very good history of and experience in a lot of different aircraft. And so I was one person they figured most of the time they could call that had time in an aircraft and was able to fly it. So from time to time they would call me up and I would go places. I'll tell you another time about the time I stole an airplane one time. Anyway, this particular airplane, I actually got to fly it. It was actually a pretty nice airplane. It had been upgraded. The engines were 8-cylinder Lycoming 400 horse motors, and it performed very nice. Anyway, I'm sure it flew better when I flew it because it was empty. When he flew it, it was pretty heavily loaded, and I'm sure it was probably all that plane wanted. We're going to take a break and pay some bills, and then we will be back and talk about some more of what I want to talk about.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Okay, welcome back. I appreciate you being here, and I'm glad you're staying around and listening in. I certainly appreciate the fact that you take the time to do that. I want to look at. I wrote 2 articles this week. I wanted to go back to the other one here. It's about education. I can't remember actually what put me onto this, what made me think about it. I remember my dad talking about when he went to school. He was raised about probably 14 or 15 miles northwest of where I live right now, and his road that he lived on was sort of a dead end road. It came off of a blacktop county road, and you went north about 2 miles. The road dead ended into a creek, the Rattlesnake Creek, and his folks' farm was there on the west side of the road, there up against the creek. Very sandy, very poor soil. I guess it's what was available when they homesteaded in the late 1800s. I think about 1886 or 87, something like that, was when the family came in there and settled, and so they raised 4 boys there. The house is gone now, unfortunately. I always kind of thought I'd like to fix it up and live in it myself. But I'm sure we all have things like that, to where there's things we'd like to do that just don't work out, and okay, so it wasn't meant to be. Anyway, Dad told me about the school was on the corner at the paved road at the end of their road, so it was about 2 miles. And sometimes they walked, sometimes they rode a horse. And when they rode the horse, they rode one horse, and all 3 boys rode the horse. Not a big deal. Anyway, it's talking about the education that we used to get, and what has happened to our educational system. We hear that we're falling behind in education. Other countries are getting ahead of us, and all this stuff, and we don't know what's going on. We need to spend more money. And that's it. We need to spend more money, and the amount of money we spend per student is unbelievable. And that's another thing I can get on to, and I'll talk about it another time. Our state Supreme Court reads the Constitution and says that education should be adequately funded. And so they looked at it and they decided we weren't spending enough money, so they told the legislators that they needed to spend more money on education. Have you ever heard such a thing? If I was a legislature, I'd tell them to go pound sand. That's not their decision how much we spend. If the bills are getting paid, they're adequately funded, right? I don't know where they get off like that. And these courts, that's just another issue. It's not just the Supreme Court of the United States. The state Supreme Courts and a lot of district courts are run amok with craziness as well. But anyway, as we look at this little one-room schoolhouse, it was 1st through 8th grade, and I actually they had a male teacher, which is very, very unusual. Typically, it was a woman. She was unmarried. It was expected she would stay unmarried. If she married, she was usually lost her job, because it was understood that, especially back in this time, a woman was integral to the family at home. And without a woman at home in the family couldn't really function, because we were talking an agrarian society, remember. So it wasn't like a male chauvinist kind of a thing, like that you can't be married. It was a practical thing. If you were married, you didn't have time to be teaching. You had to be helping your husband and helping your children, what have you. So anyway, like I said, it was very unusual. I knew the man very, very well. He died here probably about 15 years ago, something like that. But I knew him very well, and like I said, he was my dad's school teacher when he was in grade school. And it was things were strict. Discipline was very firm. They'd use a switch or whatever. Everybody pitched in. There was no janitor. The kids kept the school clean. The kids, hauled the wood in the wintertime. The kids kept the fire going. There was a mentorship sort of thing. The little kids, the first graders were helped by the third graders. The third graders were helped by the fifth graders. The fifth graders were helped by the eighth graders, and so that sort of thing. So it was sort of a spiral type of learning. So by the time you got to eighth grade, you had seen all this stuff many, many times. And so it was a really good way to get an education. They built these schools, of course, in a way to where typically they were about 3 or 4 miles from the farthest house, and maybe 5. So that was considered a reasonable distance to walk. And Schools didn't last as long. Sometimes they went a winter session and a summer session, so that they had the spring and the fall. Once again, for agrarian societies, they needed to be able to work on the farm and help plant and help harvest. So a typical school day is a kid would get up early. Of course, he's on the farm, and he helps milk the cows, he helps feed the livestock, whatever needs to be done, and then leave in time to get to school by about 8 o'clock. School might be out at about 2, might be out at 3 or 4. Just depends on the school and what they needed and how long their school year was. The average school year lasted about 130 days back then. Now it's about 50 days has been added onto that, so quite a difference. I know I was talking with some of our school board here fairly recently, and they're talking about funding and all like that, and I said, well, it seems to me pretty simple. You go 4 days a week instead of 5, and just go a little bit longer each day, and that cuts 20% out of your budget, especially from transportation and those sorts of things, and heating and cooling and all like that. There's one day it doesn't have to be done, and they said, yeah, we've discussed that, but what's happened is because now most families have both parents are working outside the home, and so the school is now the babysitter. And they can't have a kid out of school, 1 day a week. What would they do with the kid? Well, that gets to another problem. I was talking earlier about taxes, right? Well, maybe if our taxes weren't so high, we wouldn't have to have both people working so much. Anyway, we get in this vicious circle. But one thing I got to, and that it was important about this whole thing, was that to get out of the 8th grade, you had a test that you had to take. And some states, some localities allowed you to take the test at the end of 7th grade. And if you passed the test, then you graduated. Otherwise, you could take it again with there was not a problem. Even then, if you took it when you were in 8th grade and then passed it, it was considered you'd graduated 8th grade. That's where we get, I know, when I was growing up, no deal was made about graduation until I got to high school. But around here, 8th grade graduation is a big deal, and I'm sure that just stems over from the time to when 8th grade was the end of it. I'll tell you what, if you'll take a look at this article I wrote and on Landers.buzz, Education in America Then and Now, I've got a link to an 8th grade test. And I would encourage you to take it and see how you do. I think most college graduates right now would never pass this test. The thing we need to kind of think about is as we look at what we've got, what the product that we're putting out of our schools right now, they know nothing about history. They know nothing about our country and why we have what we have. Most kids think that socialism is an alternative form of government. They don't know anything negative about it. The product that came out of this educational system, I want you to think about this. These are the men who then came in and developed the aircraft carriers, the bombers and everything for World War II. They're the people who developed the atomic bomb, the SR-71. They sent men to the moon. You understand they did all those things. The biggest calculator they had was a slide rule. Now we look at that, we think of that and say, oh man, there's no way they could do it. Well, they did it because that was the way it was. And we have put so much emphasis on other things. And when I say other things, I mean everything from Heather Has Two Mommies to whatever else is going on. Sports are a good thing in school, but sports are not where it's all at. We spend an incredible amount of money on other activities and everything. If we're gonna be concerned about what we're teaching our kids, I think we need to teach them and teach them right. I wouldn't have a problem with going back to one-room schoolhouses, but I'm sure that's not going to happen. anyway, that's my 2 cents. I encourage you to look that article up and take that test and just get give yourself a little bit of a grin. We're going to take another break here, and then we'll get into the final segment here fairly shortly. Okay, we're back again. Glad to have you with us, and I guess if you haven't stayed with us, then you don't hear this. I want to take this last segment, and I just want to talk a little bit about myself. I mentioned a little bit about my dad and all. We lost him in 2013. We actually lost him before that because he had Alzheimer's. It's a terrible disease. And his last several months were not good ones. I remember the one thing that my wife and I noticed that after he passed, and we looked at him, and his face seemed to be at peace. The confusion of that disease really must work on a mind. Anyway, I'm sorry. Sorry I got emotional there. I wrote an article, it's been about 3 weeks ago. I haven't published it. I'm going to, but I just wanted to sit down, and I thought I need to kind of talk a little bit about what is all this, the voice of reason and Michael Murphy, and who am I, and why should you pay attention to me? And so I'm just going to read this article to you, and then we'll kind of finish things up and close out for the evening. Perhaps you've seen the tags and you've wondered what this is all about. Well, let's just start at the beginning, my beginning. My name is Michael Murphy, and I'm the man behind the voice of reason. My father was raised on a dirt farm in central Kansas. He was born in 1925, raised during the Depression, but he told me he didn't know that they were poor. He was the middle of 3 boys. They always had plenty of food, raised right there on the farmstead, and what they couldn't raise or make themselves, they bartered for. When World War II broke out, he was in high school at the time, and he enlisted as soon as he graduated. He qualified for aviation cadet training, and he flew a multitude of aircraft and served in the South Pacific as a navigator, bombardier, and radar operator. He separated from the Air Corps after the war, and he opened a photography studio in a town near where he was raised, and eventually moved it to Oklahoma, and that's where he met my mother, and it's where I was born 3 years later. Over the years, he sold the studio, he worked in sales, he went back into the Air Force and the missile program as an electronics inspector, and he later even became a minister. I tell you about him, maybe so that you can better understand me. I was taught that I could do anything I put my mind to, a belief he obviously held for himself. I believe most people are self-defeating. They fear failure more than they seek the reward of success. Between the military and other job changes, moving prevented me from going to the same school for a full school year until the 7th grade. I learned to make friends quickly and adapt to changes. it would be many years before I fully understood the importance of those rearing experiences and my father's influence in my life. This missive is not intended to be an autobiography. I have many remarkable stories I'd love to share, and I will in due course. I can tell you that interesting events from my life make them pertinent to our lives and national choices. Certainly events and encounters help shape who and what I am today. One of those events was, without a doubt, September 11th, 2001. At the time, I was a captain with United Airlines. 9/11 had and still has a profound impact on my life. One of the greatest threats I recognized early on was not Osama bin Laden, but my own nation. In many ways, our own government took actions that impacted our lives much more than Al-Qaeda ever did. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I honestly believe that in many ways the government is inept, and it would be unable to carry out and organize large-scale events such as blowing up the trade towers or faking the lunar landing. No, we are largely the victim of progressives. To a large extent, the leadership on both sides of the aisle believe us incapable of ruling and governing ourselves. Whether it is a belief a citizen should be forbidden to own and possess a gun, or that a citizen must own and possess a gun, either of these is a violation of the words and intent of our Declaration and Constitution. I've heard it said, if I must pay for your birth control, then you must pay for my ammo. Well, that plays well when you're talking with conservatives, but it's also a violation of our founding principles. As I watched government grow and become more and more intrusive and pile on more and more debt in post-9/11 years of the Bush 43 presidency, I became more of a student of the founders and original intent. After Obama was elected, I studied even more. I've always loved history. I became a student of people and events that formed this great nation. One of the most enlightening books I've read was The 5,000-Year Leap. I cannot recommend it enough. One friend told me recently, as I'm reading The 5,000-Year Leap, I gain a new appreciation for how messed up our nation is. Indeed. As I became more engaged, it became easier to get into arguments on Facebook. I was spending a lot of time in research, and I simply could not understand why people just based everything on feelings, and not just those on the left. Many on my side of the aisle have no clue as to the essentials of constitutional conservatism. I wrote a book, Spare Time, and tried to get people to engage while I entertained them. I began to write for a conservative group, and I was asked to be a regular guest on a local radio program. I was trying hard to be reasonable. I no longer argued with people online. I made my points and I moved on. One day I was talking to James Lowe, Jiggy Jaguar, about my radio spot, and he told me he was calling my segment The Voice of Reason. He commented that he had had guests daily from both sides of the political spectrum who reacted to events in predictable ways. But when I got on the air, I tended to look deeper into the issue and its cause. He said my response was often a voice of reason, so he tagged my segment with that moniker. I have to say I was honored that what I was trying to do was actually obvious. As this past presidential election cycle began, reason seemed quite far from most writers and show hosts, let alone the average voter. I had hoped that after the election was over, perhaps reason would become more and more common. It seems our society has no desire to be reasonable. A close friend recently told me while talking to his mother, she said she had not heard from his sister for some time. His mom called to see if there was a problem and was told, "Yes, it's who you voted for president." My self-declared mission has become one of education and enlightenment, to try and show people in a calm and reasoned way the path to return our nation to one where we work together, that we appreciate and respect each other regardless of differences. Many people like to use labels and define each other with liberal or conservative or another term. It's time we tried to move past that. People who adhere to a constitutional vision for our nation typically do a terrible job of conveying how and why the system our founders gave us is actually advantageous for all. We will forever have the opposition of those who believe we are incapable of making choices for ourselves. It is make that our job, to properly articulate how and why we are better off with more liberty and less government. I hope you will join me and that the voice of reason will swell to a large chorus of voices that can and will make a difference in the path on which we find our nation. As I write, I used to write a lot of articles that would really try to bore in, and go after people and things like that. And I got a lot of readership. I got a lot of comments, and I was one of 10,000 doing the exact same thing. And all I was doing was stirring the pot. I wasn't adjusting the flame under the pot. I know I'm just one person. But you're just one person as well. And if we get enough one persons to calm down and be reasonable, I think we can make a difference. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event, and I talked about it where Ted Nugent was there. And he said something that really fits with this. Now, Ted Nugent is one, of course, it's right in your face. He stirs the pot. There's no doubt about that. But he said each of us has to fix the ones in our lives. Whether it's a spouse, whether it's children, whether it's parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. We have people in our lives that are unreasonable. In most cases we do. And it's up to us in a reasoned way to try to educate them. We don't have to have everybody agree with us in everything. That's not ever going to happen, and that's not what I'm after. What we need to understand is that there were some very sound founding principles behind our nation, and we have left them. And until we return to them, we won't save anything. And I think our republic is worth saving. And I think you do too. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we get out here and we like to shout from the rooftop, and we like to and like I said in the article, I was right in there. I was stirring it up on Facebook. I would get in a group of people, and I would stand toe to toe with them and all, and it gets nowhere. It gets nowhere. And while we might garner a bunch of support, and we might rally the troops, so to speak, what we need to do is grow the troops. There are those who have blinders on, who will not listen, who don't care what you have to say, and will not open their eyes to the truth and what this nation really means, how this republic really works. Their minds are not going to be confused with facts. I think of the scripture where Jesus said, "A sower went out to sow, and as he scattered the seed, it landed in different soil." There are people we will talk to that will refuse to listen. Or they might listen for a little while and then they'll just go on. But if we try to jam it down their throat, or if we try to make them a conservative, so to speak, or make them a constitutionalist, we will be ineffective. I think there's a place for those who are out there who are stirring the pot. I think there's a place for them, and I think it's good that they do. I'm not telling them not to do it. I'm just saying that I think we have enough people stirring the pot. I think we have to have a few people that are doing something else, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work on me, and hopefully you can go along with me. God bless you all, and we'll see you next week.